united forever in friendship and labor, our mighty republics will ever endure. The great Soviet Union will live through the ages, the dream of a people, their fortress secure. Long live our Soviet motherland, built by the people's mighty hand. Long live her people, united and free, strong in a friendship tried by fire. Long may our crimson flag inspire, shining in glory for all men to see. Through days dark and stormy, while great Lenin led us, our eyes saw the bright sun of freedom above, and Stalin, our leader, with faith in the people, inspired us to build up the land that we love. For the future, destroyed the invader, and brought to our homeland the laurels of fame. Her glory will live in the memory of nations, and all generations will honor her name. Long live our Soviet motherland, built by the people's mighty hand. Long live her people, united and free, strong in a friendship tried by fire. Long may our crimson flag inspire, shining in glory for all men to see.
We're going to carry on looking at the question of restoration of capitalism in the USSR. Today, we shall look at some of the questions of our movement. The first part of it will be concerned about the proletariat. 1, what is proletariat? 2, what is modern proletariat? 3, machines that produce machines. 4, leading role of the proletariat in the progress of capitalist society into a socialist society. 5, workers and proletarians under capitalism, number 1. 6, workers and proletarians under socialism, number 1. 6.1, proletarian dictatorship under socialism. 6.2, people's state under socialism. 6.3, bourgeoisie under socialism, and thus proletarian dictatorship is a means of class struggle against the bourgeoisie under socialism. 6.4, proletarian dictatorship under communism. 6.5, proletarian dictatorship is a non-state. 7, workers and proletarians under capitalism. 2. 8, workers and proletarians under restoration of capitalism from socialism. Number 2. Proletariat. We all know that proletariat came into being during slavery, the section of the people who have no property at all, propertyless, that is proletarian. They existed throughout the history. This is distinct from the lumpen proletariat, which are the proletarians who being forced to live outside of production, engage in criminal activities to survive. 2, modern proletariat. Modern proletariat is the proletariat that capitalism produces, not just in industry, but also in mining, forestry, fishing, agriculture, and of course, as lumpen proletariat. But the main thing about capitalist development is the capitalist industry. And thus, the modern proletariat of capitalism is the modern industrial proletariat that comes to be as part of the capitalist industrial development. This is the proletariat that works in production using machines and thus work in the factory. Machines that produce machines. Capitalist industry and thus capitalism comes to its own when it starts to make machines using machines. And that work becomes a separate industry on its own. The law of priority development of production, of means of production for progressive capitalist production, for reproduction, becomes established thanks to this development. 4, leading role of the proletariat in the progress of capitalist society into a socialist society. It is rather interesting to note that many a proletarian revolutionary do not consider as to why the proletariat, that is modern industrial proletariat, is the leader of the further progress of present-day class society, as to why it must lead all the classes into the future. It is because modern industrial proletariat is a special product of modern capitalist industrial production. And any further progress of production under these modern conditions require further progress of industry, which makes the capitalists not a means, but a burden for this further progress, while the proletariat is a must to further progress this industrial productive activity. It is thus that they must lead all classes and sections of the society to build and further progress the industrial productive activity. And only they, by coming to power, further progressing the industrial production to computerized, fully automated production as we speak, that humanity can develop production and thus get rid of all classes. Otherwise, it would get stuck in the rule of the capitalist, which simply cannot carry the further progress of production to satisfy continuously increasing human needs. Although all the modern industrial proletarians are the leaders of all the proletarians of capitalist production and of all classes, and thus of farmers, peasants, and of the intellectuals, the very leaders of the modern industrial proletarians are the sections of the proletarians that work in the sector of industry that builds machines to build machines. Just as that section of industry is the leading section of industry for capitalist industrial production, so are the proletarians who work in that section of industry are the leading section of all modern industrial proletarians and of all modern proletarians, and thus of present-day society. Workers and proletarians under capitalism. There are sections of proletarians who are able to save money and thus buy property, such as a house. These proletarians, by being able to do this and thus being able to achieve a petit bourgeois mode of life, that of life of a petit proprietor, are in fact no longer proletarians, but workers who have to work to survive, just like a proletarian, but owns property, like a petit bourgeois, and live better compared to the proletarians, like a petit bourgeois. Marx and Engels refer to English bourgeoisie, whilst progressing themselves, aiming to form workers who are rather like petit bourgeois. This due to English monopoly in industry at that time. As we know, English bourgeoisie was not able to achieve this aim, but did achieve bourgeois conditions and bourgeois approach to policies amongst the upper sections of the workers. During Lenin's time, with the development of monopoly capitalism, with imperialism, all the major capitalist countries were able to produce their own bourgeoisified upper crust, the source of opportunism in the working class movement. 5.1. CPGB, in one of its teaching materials before 1953, undermines the distinction between proletarians and workers, calling all laborers who have to work to live workers, which of course is correct by itself, but there is a distinction between proletarians and workers. Workers and proletarians under socialism. We know that after the victorious October Revolution, Soviet proletarians became the common owners of the means of production in the USSR. This was well established with the building of socialism in the USSR, which building legally confirmed by Stalin Constitution. Before the building of socialism, there were relatively large sections of capitalists in the cities, which were got rid of relatively quickly, and in the countryside, which took longer to get rid of. Once these were done, and once socialist constitution came into being, based on the actual building of socialism in industry and agriculture, once proletarians did become the common owners of all means of production through their state, noting the collective farm property as a lower form of this, but not state farms and not the tractor stations, which are owned by the state. And as can be seen, proletarians of USSR were no longer proletarians, be they industry or agriculture. Not an upper crust of proletarians, but all proletarians of USSR, and in common were the owners of everything to all intent and purposes. Thus, they were no longer proletarians, but workers. And just like their proletarian comrades in capitalist countries, it was the modern industrial workers who were the leaders of all sections of the people, of the collective peasants and intellectuals. And just like their proletarian comrades under capitalism, in the USSR, under socialism too, it is the section of the workers who work in the section of industry that produce machines to build machines, who are the leading sections of the workers under socialism. Or it is their section of industry that has to lead all other sections of production and distribution to fully automated production, and thus to the age of plenty, where the classes will disappear, to the age of computerization. 6.1. Proletarian dictatorship under socialism. If one has to note that one has to build socialism in one country, and thus the proletarians who have built that socialism are no longer proletarians, but workers, one may come to the conclusion that the proletarian dictatorship in the said country is no longer a proletarian dictatorship, but a workers' dictatorship. This approach could be used, and there would be nothing wrong with it by itself. But this can lead to a major problem regarding nationalism. For the cause of the proletariat is not a national, one country cause. Proletariat is by nature an international class, and its cause is an international cause. Liberation of one of its sections in one country, in one nation, only provides better conditions for the liberation of all the sections of the proletariat, provides a base area for the world proletariat. It is thus that until the whole sections of the proletarians are liberated, even if it is liberated section built communism in one country, its state, one taking full note of the changes it has gone through and noting this, is still a proletarian dictatorship. For it is but a part and parcel of the proletariat's fight against the bourgeoisie all over the world. 6.2, People's State under Socialism. First of all, one has to note that the proletarian dictatorship, that is the proletarian state, is a people's state, led and thus directed by the proletariat. Communist Party constantly draws all sections of the people into the administration of the state, of the proletarian dictatorship. Understood within this context, there is nothing wrong with the declaration of the proletarian dictatorship being a people's state. But under socialism, with exploiting classes destroyed, there are still classes, proletarians, or rather old proletarians, the new workers, the collective farm peasantry, and the intelligentsia as a stratum. Thus, the state, although a people's state, administered by all the sections of the people, is still a proletarian dictatorship, for only the proletariat can lead the society to communism, as understood above, as workers. Thus, so long as classes exist under socialism, so does the leadership directing role of the proletariat, in bracket, of the workers, and thus the proletarian dictatorship remains. To replace dictatorship of the proletariat with a people's dictatorship, meaning the common leading role of the people, of proletariat and collective peasantry, is reactionary. To disregard the fact that proletarian dictatorship is a people's state is also reactionary. 6.3. Bourgeoisie under socialism, and thus proletarian dictatorship, is a means of class struggle against the bourgeoisie under socialism. We all know that the period of building socialism in a country is also a period of class struggle against the bourgeoisie that exists in that country. But once the socialism is built, it is not only the proletariat of the socialist country that becomes no longer proletariat, but workers. The bourgeoisie is no longer. Bourgeoisie as a class does not exist any longer. Thus, the theory that there is bourgeoisie in a country that has built socialism is a reactionary theory. It is actually a theory of bourgeois socialism, such is the socialism of Tito, Mao, and others. Thus, the justification of the proletarian dictatorship under socialism, because there exists bourgeoisie under socialism, is a reactionary theory, is a bourgeois Tito Mao theory. Opposition of this proletarian dictatorship to Khrushchev's people's state and taking sides in this struggle of opposites produced nothing but defeat for the communists. For both sides of the arguments are against communism, against Lenin-Stalin plan of building socialism, communism. proletarian dictatorship under communism. If the proletariat of one country wills communism in one country, because the imperialist encirclement has not been broken, and thus the state has to be preserved under communism, that state will still be a proletarian dictatorship. Under communism, there will be no class differences and no distinction between the intelligentsia and the workers, and all will take part in the administration of the state directly through the development of direct democracy as the last form of state using computers, internet. But the state will still be the proletarian dictatorship, for it will be at the service of the world proletariat and its international cause. So long as imperialist encirclement persists, and thus, so long as the state persists, the state, this people's state, will be nothing but the proletarian dictatorship against the world bourgeoisie. Proletarian dictatorship is a non-state. State comes into being as a means of suppressing the majority by the minority. That is what a state is. Means of oppressing, suppressing of the majority by the minority. It comes to be for that purpose. And the moment it no longer serves that purpose, it no longer is, it is no longer is a state, it is dead, it is no more. What is the proletarian dictatorship? The proletarian state. It's a means of suppressing the minority by the majority. Thus, as Lenin puts it a number of times, it is no longer a state. Furthermore, due to suppressing the minority by our state within the one country, within that country, comes to an end for all practical reasons, purposes, as soon as we finish off the bourgeoisie within that country. See Stalin's 18th Congress. Thus, the proletarian dictatorship, where the socialist society has been built, is even less of a non-state than the non-state Lenin talked of. For there is not even a minority to suppress within the country. And that is why the motive form of development of our socialist society during its transition to communism becomes criticism and self-criticism. If the imperialist encirclement persists as it reaches communism, our state will have the best armed forces and the best intelligence services, but more importantly, it will have the most conscious, most humanly moral, most organized, most cultured people, with the most means of satisfying their ever-rising material and cultural needs, with no close class differentiation at all, who will actually be that state. It will thus be the strongest state the world has ever seen. And that state will be the most developed form of the non-state. And it will thus start to disappear as soon as the imperialist encirclement is replaced with the communist encirclement. Workers and proletarians under capitalism. The general crisis of capitalism has deepened after October Revolution. For this reason, even the developed capitalist countries were not able to produce a large section of workers as opposed to proletarians. This in spite of the technical progress that made production of goods much faster and easier. Only USA had progressed in producing proletarians with property, that is workers, and that was a very small section of the proletarians. This situation did not change after the coming into being of people's democracies. crisis of capitalism did further deepen. There appears steps taken to make life easier for the proletarians, but deepening of the general crisis and the worsening of the conditions of the proletarians in the developed countries and in their colonies continued. With 1953, with the death of Comrade Stalin, and with the change of direction in the USSR and people's democracies, and with the development of the technique of production, you see that a relatively large section of the proletarians, compared to 1953, are given petty bourgeois living conditions. That a relatively large section of the proletarians become workers who own some property, able to save some funds in the developed countries after 1953. Workers and proletarians under restoration of capitalism from socialism. It is said that it's the assumption of power by the revisionists, who are but traitors after 1953, Stalin's death, 20th Congress, or for some 1961, the new program of Khrushchev. The workers of USSR become proletarians, for they are no longer the common owners of the property of USSR through their state, for the state is now run by the revisionists. This is, of course, similar to Trotskyite theory of Stalinist bureaucrats controlling the state. And thus, Soviet workers are proletarians being exploited by the Stalinist bureaucrats, or new bourgeoisie, or bureaucrat bourgeoisie, etc. If only, would say the traitors, these Trotskyite who destroyed USSR. If only things were that easy to do. 8.1. With Yugoslavia, where socialism was not built in the restoration of capitalism by the Trotskyite traitors, was a quick affair. There, the rich peasants, and through them the tradesmen within the country, and tradesmen representing each independent enterprise, working with the imperialist powers led by the USA, provided the perfect environment to transform all the products of Yugoslavia, and thus the workers' labor power into commodity. This transformation of labor power into a commodity has given to such forms that labor power as a commodity was actually sold to the German imperialists beginning late 1960s and early 1970s by the Yugoslav Teutonics. Since this was coordinated by anti-communist fascist forms of state governance by the Anglo-American spy network of Trotskyite traitors, communists were immediately forced into the underground and began to organize a new communist party to destroy the Trotskyite fascist spy ring of traitors and to rebuild the socialist Yugoslavia. This process was betrayed from within with the establishment of relations with the Trotskyite and with the declaration of their governance as yet another form of building socialism by Communist Party of Soviet Union and USSR and the people's democracies and by all the communist parties. Transformation of USSR and European people's democracies assumed different forms. Due to one, USSR being a socialist country, where the bourgeoisie has been destroyed altogether, and the country is highly developed in all respects. Two, needs of USA led imperialism to dominate and exploit the world. We have discussed about this and we shall further discuss about it. Let's go to another issue of our theory, which is also related to building of restoration of capitalism in the USSR. I am sure comrades took note of the previous talk, where the people's state and people's dictatorship and all that have been compared. And these are all theories of so-called theories of restoration in the USSR, which is not correct. Let us now look at the building of communism in one country. Comrades should take note of the fact that this is directly related to restoration of capitalism in the USSR. And thus, those Stalinists and those who are supposed to be fighting restoration of capitalism in the USSR are actually part and parcel of restoration of capitalism in the USSR. Building of communism in one country. Let us read Stalin himself. As you see, we now have an entirely new socialist state, without precedent in history, and differing considerably in form and functions from the socialist state of the first phase. But development cannot stop there. Let me repeat this myself. Development cannot stop there. We are going ahead towards communism. Will our state remain in the period of communism also? Yes, it will. Unless the capitalist encirclement is liquidated and unless the danger of foreign military attack has been disappeared. Naturally, of course, the forms of our state will again change in conformity with the change in the situation at home and abroad. No, it will not remain and will entropy if the capitalist encirclement is liquidated and the socialist encirclement takes its place. This is 1939. Certainly, once socialism has been built, as it was built in the USSR, and thus a socialist state and the famous constitution was also created, one has to decide as to what to do. Go on to building communism or be satisfied with what is built, that is socialism. Actually, there is no choice here. Development cannot stop. We are going ahead towards communism. It is thus that plans were being drawn regarding the building of communism after the Second World War. The slogan, "We shall achieve plenty," that is communism, was the slogan of the day. 1A. The attack on Lenin's Stalin plan of building socialism, communism, besides all other issues, also relate to this issue. Many comrades who claim to defend Stalin, that he is the builder of socialism in the USSR and the destroyer of Hitler, etc., have basically two different approaches to this issue. First one openly declared that communism cannot be built in one country, and that Stalin has made a mistake declaring communism can be built in one country. Second ones declare that this approach is an attack on Stalin, that actually Stalin is not here talking of the highest stage of communism, but talking of the first phase of communism. That is, after all, socialism. And those who attack Stalin, claiming that he is talking of higher phase of communism, are distorting him, they say. They put this view forward, for they also agree that communism cannot be built in one country. Both these approaches agree that one cannot build communism in one country. We, on our part, call both these approaches as new Trotskyism. Before socialism was built, the position of Trotskyism was the denial of the possibility of building socialism in the USSR. They also declared that it is Stalin who came up with the impossible policy. We show them Lenin's cooperative plan, thus his plan of building socialism in the USSR, and is known. There are many a writing of Lenin that openly declares that we have all we need to build socialism and that we are building it no matter. A sect is a sect. It will close its eyes to reality, lie about it, and go on repeating. You cannot build socialism in one country. This is the absolute, unchangeable truth of all Trotskyite sects. And what are you supposed to do if you cannot build socialism while you are at the government? Of course, you restore capitalism. We all know of Trotsky's plan of restoration of capitalism, which has now been realized. But while Stalin was alive, socialism has been built. Everyone knows it. Stalin applied and developed Lenin's plan of building socialism in one country, in the USSR. And socialism was built. Now that socialism has been built, now comes the question, can communism be built in one country, especially in such a large and powerful country of many nationalities as USSR that has the support of the world proletariat? Under these conditions, under the conditions of socialism having been built in one country, Trotskyite sect had to adapt. Other than coming up many varied forms of proving that socialism has not been built in one country, they also had to come up with a view that accepts that building of socialism in one country, but declare that communism cannot be built in one country. One sect and one absolute truth of a sect opens up opportunities for many an interpretation of that absolute idea. Socialism has been built in one country, it can be done, but communism cannot be built in one country. So we are the government, we have built socialism, but you cannot build communism. What are you supposed to do then? Of course, you restore capitalism. Come back to the holy grail of Trotskyism. For after all, what does the socialism cannot be built in one country really there for? It is there to restore capitalism. If you are forced to accept that socialism has been built, you then have to come up with a new grail. Socialism can be built in one country, but communism cannot be built in one country. In fact, the restorers of capitalism in the USSR has gone through two phases as regards this issue. Khrushchev phase was when high-sounding declarations were being made of building communism, while every policy proposed and applied was blocking this building of communism and was creating absolute chaos and degeneration and preparing the ground for the restoration of capitalism. He was a follower under different conditions of his close friend and comrade Tito the Trotskyite. This phase came to an inevitable end. Communism was not built. The second phase of Brezhnev was based on giving up on building communism in USSR. They anchored themselves on what they called higher phase of socialism, developed socialism, until the total destruction was ordered by their imperial masters. This policy of denying the possibility of building communism in one country is the policy of restoration of capitalism in a country that has built socialism. This is to help cover the crimes of traitors who destroyed socialism that was built by declaring that building of communism in one country is impossible. You see, it is why they could not build it. They could not build communism, not because they are traitors to Lenin-Stalin plan of building socialism, communism, but because it cannot be done. It is thus correct that they are called new Trotskyites. Titoite, Trotskyites, all of them. Traitors to communism, enemies of the people, all of them. Furthermore, this discussion about building communism in one country is not just a simple issue of Stalin making a mistake or Stalin not being interpreted correctly, as those who declare that one cannot build communism in one country say. It is directly related to Lenin-Stalin plan of building socialism, communism, and thus to the Lenin-Stalin plan of building world communism. It is thus that these critics and correctors inevitably criticize Stalin here and there and everywhere. They come up with Trotskyites here and there and everywhere by swearing to Stalin here and there and everywhere. They have corrections and or correct interpretations in plenty. It is thus correct that they are called new Trotskyites. New Trotskyism is the worst form of Trotskyism. Now, there's another issue relating to this building of communism in one country. Building of communism in one country and final victory of socialism in one country. Some comrades are adamant that one cannot build communism in one country, especially that one cannot build communism in one country and keep the state, which is the proletarian dictatorship. One part of these comrades declare that communism is only possible as a worldwide society and without a state. While Stalin says one can build communism in one country and must keep and strengthen the state while and after building of communism, if imperialism has not been destroyed or at least neutralized. How wrong is Stalin and how anti-Lenin is Stalin? Not only is he anti-Stalin, he is even anti-Stalin. Not only is he anti-Lenin, he is even anti-Stalin. For he was himself opposed to the final victory of socialism in one country, and yet here he's talking of building communism in one country. They say. The other part of these comrades, the opposite, also declare that communism in one country is only possible as a worldwide society. Sorry. The other part of these comrades also declare that communism is only possible as a worldwide society and without a state, while those who say that Stalin says one can build communism in one country and must keep and strengthen the state while and after the building of communism, if imperialism has not been destroyed, or the other part of these comrades who are opposed to them also declare that communism is only possible as a worldwide society and without a state. While those who say that Stalin says one can build communism in one country and must keep and strengthen the state, while and after building of communism, if imperialism has not been destroyed or at least neutralized, are distorting Stalin. These are throats who are putting words into the mouths of Stalin. How wrong are these anti-Stalin throats? How typical distorters of the truth these throats are. For Stalin himself was opposed to the final victory of socialism in one country, and these throats say he wants to build communism in one country. And these antagonists in politics both refer to the following view from Stalin. Does this mean that such a victory can be termed a full victory, a final victory of socialism? One that would guarantee the country that is building socialism against all danger from abroad, against the danger of imperialism, imperialist intervention, and the consequent danger of restoration? No, it does not. While the question of completely building socialism in the USSR is one of overcoming our own national bourgeoisie, the question of final victory of socialism is one of overcoming the world bourgeoisie. The party says that the proletariat of one country is not in a position to overpower the world bourgeoisie by its own efforts. The party says that for that final victory of socialism in one country, it is necessary to overcome, or at least to neutralize, the world bourgeoisie. The party says that such a task is within the power only of the proletarians of several countries. Consequently, the final victory of socialism in a particular country signifies the victory of proletarian revolution in at least several countries. This is 1926-27. One thing is clear here. The question at hand is the final victory of socialism in one country. The question of final victory is the question of the danger from abroad, the danger of imperialist intervention, and the consequent danger of restoration. The party says that for the final victory of socialism in one country, it is necessary to overcome, or at least to neutralize, the world bourgeoisie. All this has nothing to do with building communism in one country after the building of socialism in one country has been achieved. After building socialism in one country, we move to building communism in one country. And we have all we need to achieve this, the building of communism in one country, especially in a country like USSR, after the building of socialism in one country. As regards the question of final victory of communism, things remains the same, for it is indeed the same question. The party says that for the final victory of socialism, in bracket communism, my note, in one country, it is necessary to overcome, or at least to neutralize, the world bourgeoisie. Comrades who call each other all sorts of names, for they are such antagonists in their approach to this question and to this view of Stalin's, base their antagonisms in the wrong comprehension of our theory. And that is why they end up in one and the same mistaken idea. Both sides of the antagonism declare that communism is only possible as a worldwide society and without a state. One side of antagonism blames Stalin for putting forward this view of building communism in one country and keeping the state. The other side blamed these comrades for distorting Stalin and declaring that Stalin never defended this view of building communism in one country and keeping the state. To both sides of the antagonism, the view of building communism in one country and keeping the state is wrong. Well, we have seen that comrades on both sides of this antagonism is wrong. And what we have is a case of wrong opposites meeting at one point. And since both sides of this antagonism love to declare their love of dialectics and blame all other for not using dialectics of this and dialectics of that, and even dialectics of Marxism, we can say that such is the dialectics of these comrades' ideas. For after all, dialectics has to be materialist and reflect the fact of life of the proletariat, historically and presently. Comrades, of course, can also have a look at the 19th Congress, Malenkov's speech on behalf of the Central Committee they shall see the defense of building communism with a state in one country. So comes to an end our talk. Next week, we shall have a look at what the traitors to communism did after 1945 to 1991, how things developed between 45 and 53, and how things have been distorted, how our motherland and our people's democracies and all our communist parties were destroyed from within. We have actually mentioned the three main tendencies based on one tendency that did this traitor's job. We shall continue next week, comrades.
United forever in friendship and labor, our mighty republics will ever endure. The great Soviet Union will live through the ages, the dream of a people, their fortress secure. Long live our Soviet motherland, built by the people's mighty hand. Long live her people, united and free, strong in a friendship tried by fire. Long may our crimson flag inspire, shining in glory for all men to see. Through days dark and stormy, while great Lenin led us, our eyes saw the bright sun of freedom above, and Stalin, our leader, with faith in the people, inspired us to build the land that we love. For the future, destroyed the invader, and brought to our homeland the laurels of fame. Her glory will live in the memory of nations, and all generations will honor her name. Long live our Soviet motherland, built by the people's mighty hand. Long live her people, united and free, strong in a friendship tried by fire.